Welcome back to the second big conversation point here on the Urban Debate. Tie a Rakhi to the woman you molested. Give her 11,000 rupees, go back to her house, meet her on the occasion of Rakhi. This is what was part of a bizarre order given by the Madhya Pradesh High Court in a case of molestation, where a woman had complained that somebody she knew from that neighborhood had come to her house and attacked her and molested her. The order actually asked this accused to go back to the same house where the alleged crime took place, to apologize to the woman, speak to her, get a Rakhi tied by her, take a photo of getting the Rakhi tied, and show it to the court. When this order came in July 2020, it did raise several eyebrows. I remember having a conversation about it here on the Urban Debate. It also pushed certain retired judges, top lawyers of our country, to go to the Supreme Court and file a plea. They asked the Supreme Court to look into this issue and see if gender sensitization is also needed in certain parts of our judicial system. Now, let me tell you what else happened today and why we are talking about it today. Because the country's top lawyer, the top lawyer for our central government, the Attorney General himself, has said that there is a need for gender sensitization of our courts, to which the Supreme Court has now asked him and a certain other notable lawyers to come up with ways in how that can be done. And so we decided to have a conversation about it, because it's not just about one specific order which may be problematic, but there have been many such in the past as well. For example, in the month of June, a Karnataka High Court order observed that it is unbecoming of a woman to sleep after rape. The court granted bail to the accused and said this is not the way our women react when they are ravished. The series of such examples. In another case, in the Kerala High Court, this was a case where a priest allegedly raped a minor and impregnated her. The court went on to reduce the sentence after the priest pleaded that he will marry the girl he had allegedly raped and impregnated. There's another example from Madras High Court from June 2015, where bail was granted to a rape accused to mediate with the victim, and the bail order referred to the survivor as nobody's wife and an unwed mother. The examples continue. So tonight, viewers, the big question that I am asking is there a specific need? And if yes, how do we go about sensitizing even our courts and make them more gender sensitive? We often talk about how that's required in our medical staff in government hospitals when it comes to crimes against women. We often talk about how it's required even for the police force and the police personnel across the country, and how they need to be trained or repeatedly, maybe, if required. We also talk about how, in general, our system, our society, and youngsters need to be, gender sensitized in schools and colleges, and that's where it should first be taught. But I believe that of all of this, it's also very important, if not more important, that our judiciary and every element of our judiciary is also sensitized. How do we do it? Let's ask the panelists who are joining us this evening. And I say good evening to Geeta Luthra, Senior Advocate with the Supreme Court, Justice Gyan Sudha Mishra, former judge with the Supreme Court, Aparna Bhatt, a petitioner in this case who's taken the matter to the Supreme Court, and Sanjay Hegde, also Senior Advocate with the Supreme Court. In fact, just for more understanding of the plea itself and why, why were they prompted to do this? Aparna Bhatt, let's start with you. Was it just one case? Were there already many other examples that were bothering, all of you to then finally take this step? Aparna Bhatt, let's begin with you on what's prompted you to take this case to the Supreme Court.
I've been reading quite a lot about judgments where they had made all kinds of comments about women. The first one was, of course, was the Karnataka High Court, where again, while granting bail, there was a lot of comments made about the character of the woman and what was expected of a woman after she was assaulted. These things really bothered me. At that time, I had written a letter to the Chief Justice of India and the women judges of the Supreme Court, basically where I had said that, you must intervene because this is, after all, a High Court judgment. And if it is not interfered with, it will become a precedent. And then one was researching, and soon thereafter, I saw this Madhya Pradesh High Court judgment. Then I spoke to the other petitioners. We are 9 lawyers who challenged it. And we all felt that this is not done at all. It's a question, it's a sexual assault. Whether it is a genuine case or not is something that will come out post the trial. But at this stage, when the bail is being heard, what is the reason for a judge to say that go and tie Rakhi? And it is outrageous on 2 counts. One, of course, under the Criminal Procedure Code itself, what the Criminal Procedure Code says, what has to be done in a bail order, what is the normal condition laid when a person is granted bail, and so many other things. And the second one is that, whether or not I believe in Rakhi, that's not relevant. But the fact is, some people, a large number of us, consider it sacrosanct. We respect the relationship between us and our brothers. And this judgment, this order, this judgment had also belittles that whole relationship. And then somehow we felt that this is not acceptable at all. And why go into these aspects at all when it's only a bail? You should grant bail on the merits of the case. If you feel accused is entitled to bail, grant him bail. If you think he's not, then don't grant him bail. If you think you want to lay conditions, and the conditions should be to support the investigation process so that the person does not interfere in the investigation. Here is a case where a person is actually asked, directed to go and contact the victim, which in other words, that on the one hand, it kind of presupposes the guilt of the accused, and on the other hand, actually facilitates him to compromise with the victim. And we said that is not acceptable. And then we researched, and I think I heard part of the judgment that you read out, which is all part of our application. We read out the judgment after judgment, and High Court after High Court has been kind of really trivializing this whole aspect in case of sexual violence. And that is why we thought we should go to the Supreme Court, challenging it and saying that Supreme Court has laid out, at least in many judgments, and we've quoted 3 of them in our submissions to the court, that Supreme Court very clearly says that just because there is a discretion granted to you doesn't mean you can impose any condition. The discretion has to be exercised judiciously, and it has to be aligned to the crime committed. And that's why we are in the court. And we are very happy that the attorney is supporting us.
Yes, in fact, I was extremely glad to hear what the Attorney General also had to say and the way this case is now progressing in the top court. But Justice Gyan Mishra, good evening to you, and thank you for being with us. Just for our understanding, are there any gender sensitization programs that are held for officers and officials and of judiciary, including judges?
See, gender sensitization program is very many, which is still prevalent right from the state of their induction and otherwise also. You must be aware about the National Judicial Academy, where the gender sensitization issues are being imparted to the trainee judges as also the sitting judges. But the question is that the theoretical aspect, where what is the kind of discretion that the subordinate judiciary, which means the district judiciary, has in its domain to use its innovative ideas so far as the punishment and bail order is concerned. That is perhaps not quite specific. If I remember that part might not have been made aware, the judges might not have been aware of the district judiciary that the district judiciary do not have the power which the Supreme Court has to use its innovative ideas, perhaps that line might not be. I don't know. I think it's the trainees who would say, but there are gender sensitization program. I don't know how much of it is injected into the judge's mind about this. That I think that might be a matter of research. As I say, there are some constitutional powers under Article 141 and 142, which the higher judiciary, the High Court and the Supreme Court might be having, which the subordinate judiciary do not have. And in that sense, when I get to know that at the time of grant of bail, the judge says that you tie a rakhi, it's a very shocking order. It's a very shocking order. And I think this can be a test case for the members of the district judiciary to realize where they have to draw the line. Like Supreme Court can give interpretation and do it, but I don't think the subordinate judiciary has to realize that it has a limitation on its powers insofar as the innovative ideas and its perceptions of the right kind of justice is concerned. That has to be, I think there are programs, there are very many programs, but I think it needs to be more highlighted and needs to be more specific to what extent they can exercise their sentencing authority. As we are all aware that there is a statute, IPC, which carves out the quantum of punishment which is to be awarded to an accused. And there, if interpretation is given right from the lowest ladder of the judiciary, I think there will be chaos. And in that sense, I'm really very shocked. And this indicates that much requires to be done so far as the discretionary power of the subordinate courts are concerned.
Okay, it's a very interesting point. Right.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting point that you raised because, a part of the conversation is to maybe train them, make all officials and judges of the judiciary more aware of, the gender sensitivities involved and what can be suggested or cannot be ordered. But the other aspect, like you said, is drawing that line of to what extent can you be innovative about it and to what extent should you just stick to what's been prescribed in the rule book. Sanjay Hegde, what's your own view? Should we look at the latter more than the first?
No. See, a lot of factors go into a judge's final decision. His life experiences also define him. Now, his or her, mind you. Here is a judge in Madhya Pradesh, and this was not, I believe, a district judge, but I believe it was the High Court. There is a bail application in a matter which involves not rape, but molestation. I don't know what he saw in the matter. He could have very well either granted bail or not granted bail and just left it at that. It does appear to me that the judge decided to be innovative, decided to go with the cultural norms which possibly appealed to him. There's one sentence that you have missed out in the order. What he says is, go to the lady with your wife. This man was married. Go with your wife, get accepted as a brother, tie a rakhi, and also give a specific rakhi gift of a particular amount. Implicit in all this was a desire to settle the matter. Should judges be settling matters? Should judges give the weight of their authority towards anybody who is accused of molestation? here we do not know I do not fully know the full facts. I do not think the judge was right. As Aparna said, he should have either granted bail or he should have not granted bail and left it at that. He may possibly have thought, might as well solve the matter instead of giving him bail, let the matter go to trial. After 10 years, 20 years, we don't know whether the lady will be there in court to depose and finish off bring the prosecution to a successful conclusion. And at the end of the day, the lady as a witness would get nothing. If this is a matter that can be sorted out by acknowledging the hurt, by promising never to do it again, and by paying money, why not do it? Is possibly what was the inarticulate major premise which was running in the judge's head. I do not approve of it, but I have given you what could be the thinking behind it. Judges do need to be trained to avoid anything that looks not only like patriarchy, but as endorsing sexual violence or sexual power play in any form whatsoever. The judge, to my mind, has gone wrong, but he did not intend to go wrong, is my sense of the matter. I don't know, I may be, it's a rare experience for me being the only man on a panel. I would defer to superior wisdom.
But don't be afraid to speak your mind, Mr. Hegde, just for that reason. We will still hear you out and your views. But let's just broad base this conversation and say that this is just one example. And Aparna was pointing out a few others that they have included in the case they have built, in the plea that they have filed. And I'm actually reading some of those that have been listed out for me as well. For example, the Madras High Court in 2015 suggested a compromise between the victim and her alleged rapist, and granted the bail to the rapist and said, well, go ahead and compromise. The girl is unmarried, an unmarried victim who's also become pregnant, maybe in the scheme of things of how society sees it, even though you perhaps raped her. I don't know what went on in his mind. He probably thought that because she's unmarried and she's now been impregnated, perhaps it's just better for her assaulter and her rapist to now marry her and give her a life that the society thinks is better. That's the whole point, Geeta Luthra, that personal views and understanding does seep into when orders are given, and sometimes that could get dangerous. So would you agree with what Gyansudhan Mishra, Justice Mishra is saying, that perhaps we need to start defining to what extent can you get innovative with your order? Geeta Luthra, I think you're on mute. You'll have to unmute.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
According to me, it's already defined in several judgments of the Supreme Court. There are, for example, cases as absurd as someone giving bail and saying you have to deposit 1 crore, which was in one of my cases which I challenged in the Supreme Court, or an order of onerous terms. The courts have said when you're granting bail, the terms can't be onerous, the terms can't be irrational. Now, these are irrational terms. These are not terms which can be there. So when you look at section 437, which is bail in trial court, 438, which is bails in sessions at court, 439, which is pre-trial arrest bails in the sessions or high court, all of them, the parameters, time and again, the courts have come down and laid down the parameters and said that they have to be rational terms. Terms can be, person won't go abroad without permission of the court. The bail terms in terms of money or surety have to be such that they are not onerous become absurd. And all these terms can't be part and parcel of a bail order. Clearly, the judge is going in the realm of conjecture and is going in the realm of his own imagination, of his do good of society, or trying to solve some issues where clearly the judge is being gender obtuse. If he is being gender obtuse, the question is, why do we have all the judicial academies? We have judicial academies to train judges to know the law, to know how the law should work, and to be gender sensitive. This is why, over the years, not only in India, but even in the West, you have courses for becoming, for having classes on and off after you have qualified and you become lawyers and judges. So, this is further education, and for judges particularly, this aspect comes through judicial academies where they go for training through and through. Now, a absolutely insensitive, incorrect view, and I'm not talking of Rakhi being very sacrosanct for many people. I'm just saying how and on what basis can a court make an order of this nature, whatever be the perception in his mind that he's doing good. This cannot be. You may think that this person's innocent or could be innocent, and therefore say bail, not jail, and so give him bail. Or you could think, no, this is a heinous case. Now let's look at, and therefore, in the facts of this case, it doesn't deserve bail. Now, the conditions are, will a person threaten an accused? Will a person escape or abscond? These are some of the conditions when you are looking at grant of bail. So you don't go beyond those conditions when you are looking at bail, and those conditions have been set down in judicial precedents over the years, decades. Now, I was only looking at that aspect and talking about gender sensitization.
Right.
You have to gender sensitize your lawyers and your judges from making remarks which are absolutely not palatable, not acceptable. And according to me, this is one of those. I wanted to give one other aspect. When the court allows pounding of matters, settling of matters, quashing of matters, I think it's in Gyan Singh or Gyan Kaur's judgment. Justice Sikri perhaps was one of the judges, and there's one Narinder judgment also of the Supreme Court where they're saying that normally rape matters you will not allow compounding, settling, or compromising. The reason is the nature of those cases, unless in the facts of that case it appears that was it rape, was it not necessarily rape, were there other disputes, property disputes, other aspects which have crept in.
Okay.
That is what the Supreme Court has said in Narinder and Gyan and many other cases. Such cases should not be allowed to be settled even when the complainant and the accused are both at one.
So here is my concern, and Justice Mishra, maybe you can come in on this. A lot of these judgments are obviously being given out in lower courts, some in high courts, but others, in lower courts. How do we, who keeps a track? Where is the accountability? It's okay for Supreme Court to say that your judgment needs to be rational, or you shouldn't be, treading into waters of suggesting a compromise. But if it's happening in some district court, sessions court, or even a high court, who is to track that and stop that or question that?
See, there's a very, defined role as to how to introduce or to direct how to take the remedial measure. And that is only by way of an appeal or a revision or a review. if you say that, there is a monitoring committee or some kind of a supervisory authority who would guide the judges how to go about it, then that is neither conceived of in the system, because all of you are aware that there is the Code of Criminal Procedure, which defines how each role and each procedure is laid out very categorically, which gives rise to very many disputes also as to how the procedure is to be followed. So if you say that they keep a track of the decisions and how to improve, that the only way under the system, under the CRPC, that has been thought of is only by way of an appeal. If a judge has crossed the boundary, if judge has wrongly applied the law, the only way to check is to by way of an appeal, setting it aside, or a further appeal. Fortunately or unfortunately, that is the system that we have been given. So, but besides that, many a times I have noticed that in the full court meetings where the conduct of the judge and his judgments are, checked by the inspecting judge or the administrative judge, that is, for example, if he is the civil judge junior division, then the district judge sees his quality of judgment, and then the inspecting judge of a high court of that particular district also goes through the judgment. That is, one part is through the medium of appeal and revision, and the other part is on the administrative side, where the judgment of the judicial officers are gone into by the judges, and if they find that it has, his judgments time and again are wrong, then administrative orders are passed. Maybe like there are very many remedies to check on the administrative side, but there is even if the reviewing authority of a judgment agree or does not agree, that doesn't mean that he has the power to set it aside.
Okay.
So far as the setting aside is concerned, that is the defined role under the Code of Civil Procedure. That can be done only by way of an appeal and a revision. On the administrative side, of course, sometimes, if it is a very atrocious, obnoxious order, for example, like, if it has caught the attention of the entire country of the judge in Madhya Pradesh, maybe on the administrative side also he'll be called upon by the full court of the high court, or maybe by the inspecting judge or the chief justice, where he can be made to explain. But he can explain his conduct. Nevertheless, no one has got the authority to set aside except on the judicial side.
Okay,
we are all aware there are two sides. One,
yes. So let me take that point and take it to Aparna and then to Sanjay Hegde, because Aparna, that is also a concern, and pulling up a specific judge in one case may not be the solution. The solution has to be more overarching, and we can't always hope that the victims in a case will find it in them to file another appeal, to fight it further, to take it to the next level, and to even know how to go about this entire system. So then what could be a solution?
Actually, I want to come in here and to say, make one big clarification. We are playing it very safe by saying subordinate court judges. I think it's very unfair to those judges. The judgment here is passed by a high court judge.
Yeah.
And the list that we had annexed to the our application, which you read out, the Chennai, Punjab, Delhi, all those things are
all
high court judges.
Yes.
So I think while I agree there's a lot of work to be done in all tiers of the court system about being sensitive to women, it is not fair to label the subordinate court judges as being reflecting certain kind of thinking. With respect to your question about how do we do this and we can't keep filing appeals, I completely agree. And that is why we filed this appeal. That is why we filed an SLP, because I felt that just writing letters, writing editorials, writing social media columns is not going to help us. This judgment has to be set aside. And there has to be some guidelines laid out about how there is a judicial discipline maintained when you look at offenses against women. Can you just condone just because it happens to be a case of molestation which you don't relate to, that you think that you can pass an order of this kind? I mean, I think that is not acceptable. And secondly, people have made all kinds of comments. I do not want to speculate about what was going on in the judge's mind. It is not really my job or anybody's job. The judge has passed a judicial order. People make comments in the open court. People ask, do you want to compromise? Do you want to get married? These are judges ask us. We are appearing in matters all the time. But when a judicial order is passed, that means you're reflecting your judicial thinking on paper. It is for all times to come. It needs to be set aside. I must also add that when the Karnataka High Court judgment came, I was something to applaud about the judge. The moment the criticism came, he actually expunged those remarks. And judges, it's not so that reflect the judges are also sensitive to some kind of a public discussion. So two ways of doing with it. Of course, one is a sensitization is an ongoing process. They are all members of a society. If we are patriarchal, if I'm patriarchal, I should not expect the judge will not be patriarchal. A judge will also be patriarchal because he belongs to us. He's one of us. He's going to think like that. So we need to work together on this. So sensitization is one aspect, but I think a dialogue, a conversation, and discussions, and also expressing outrage when something that we do not like happens, and also file appeals. The Women's Commission should have actually come forward in this case, file an appeal against this matter, because ultimately they are bestowed with the power under Section 10 of the National Commission of Women's Act to take up issues like this. People like me cannot come in each court, each time. We do not have the resources or the time, or sometimes we are not even aware of it. There has to be an agency, and Women's Commission, I think, is most suited to do this, is whether they have to keep watching. If something untoward, something irresponsible, or something, an aberration takes place, they need to step in. They need to take corrective action for that. And I will not say that by this one judgment, we will completely sanitize the whole process. It won't happen. I'm not that hopeful at all. But I'm only hopeful that this will perhaps be a part of many other judgments which has actually laid down guidelines about what is not acceptable to do in cases of women. That's what I want.
What is not acceptable? This is what we repeatedly speak about, has to be told and discussed, and people need to be made aware in various walks of our life, in various professions, in various corporate houses, in various banks, in various schools and colleges, in the police department or any other force, and similarly in the judiciary. To Sanjay Hegde, to the point that you were making, that he probably didn't have a wrong intent, but this is essentially what he said or did. Isn't that the big problem? Isn't that the bigger problem? That, there may be judges, irrespective of their gender, who think this is all right because that's the mindset they have, that's the way our society has been, and no one's told them that it's not acceptable anymore.
So exactly, you're doing the correct thing by telling them that they have done the wrong thing. They will learn. And at each point of time, when somebody errs, when the mistake is pointed out, the good people learn to correct their mistakes. Aparna just spoke about the Karnataka High Court judge. All that I am saying is that this is a continuing conversation, and judges, male judges, female judges, all have a lot to learn as to what was acceptable 10 years ago, 15 years ago, is not acceptable now. That thinking has to change with the times. There was an example from Madhya Pradesh, which is cited in a Supreme Court judgment of Justice Kehar. It dealt with the sexual harassment of a sitting lady judge, a district judge, by a High Court judge. And in the course of arguments, the lady lawyer used a word, the male lawyer used the word delightful when referring to the lady lawyer's arguments. The lady lawyer took objection to it. The Supreme Court judgment does say that there are circumstances when no hurt was intended, but nevertheless hurt happens. The word delightful, when used in the context of an argument can have one particular meaning. When it is used in the context of a woman can possibly have a pejorative meaning. So the point I'm making is that there are thin but perceptible lines. People should know when not to cross the line, and if inadvertently a line gets crossed, then immediately apologize and set things right.
Yes, but I will just make the distinction there, Mr. Hegde, that commenting as part, while that's also not right, and people evolve and they learn, sometimes the lines also change with times, is very different than it being part of a judicial order, which will actually impact lives and most possibly lives of women who've been victims of some kind of a sexual crime. And then it just takes a very different turn in terms of impact. And there it's even more important that those who are passing these orders or even making these comments are more aware of what they're saying and the impact it may have on that woman's mindset, psyche, or her life in general. I'm completely out of time, but thank you so much to all of the 4 panelists who've joined us in this conversation. Thank you to Aparna Bhatt and the rest of the petitioners who've gone to Supreme Court and picked up this issue. So at least the conversation has started. And now we will wait to watch to see what Attorney General of our country has to suggest, what the Supreme Court has to say, and if at all this can lead to a bigger change, lead to perhaps more gender-sensitive programs in the judicial academies, lead to perhaps a change in the mindset, get our judicial officers to think about what they are writing, what it means. Do they really need to get innovative in such ways to try and be the big daddy or the uncle of our society and our family who's trying to arrive at some kind of compromise? Is that really the role of our judges, or is it to give justice basis the crime and the evidence? Let's wait and watch what happens in this case, but it is definitely a great conversation starter. Some amount of gender sensitivity needs to be brought into every aspect, more so the judiciary, because they're the ones we turn to for justice, to look out for us and for our interests. Thank you for joining us in this conversation.